We didn't plan this, but Richie and I both look like we came from our shift at Moe's.
Mm-hmm. I noticed.
Right. I only just a few nights ago, my wife and I were actually at our one of our local watering holes, and we sat on the side of the bar we normally don't sit on because it was actually pretty packed now that people are starting to come back out again. And we noticed for the first time there's a Moe's clock on the wall that we had never seen before, and largely it's because I've never been on that side of the bar before.
I went to a Moe's pop-up bar in Dallas yesterday, and I felt like an idiot because I was looking at this really awesome mural. It was the scene from the Simpsons movie with Bart splattered up on the glass and the French fry strategically covering what it needs to. And I'm like, oh my God, that mural at the end of the hallway is so cool. And finally somebody taps me on the shoulder and points behind me. It was a mirror I was looking at. The mural was right behind me. Like I'm looking down this hallway like, wow, that's so cool. And like, oh. Yeah, it was a good time. Cool. Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Best Darn Everything, our bi-weekly spin-off podcast where we take a break from talking about The Simpsons to talk about other things that we love that sometimes also revolve around The Simpsons. Today, we are so excited to have a returning guest and a brand new guest joining us to talk about Comic-Con Begins. But before we get to them, joining me, as always, your co-host with the most, Richie the Whiz Kid. How are you doing today, Rich?
I'm doing great, man. I can't wait to hear what fun Comic-Con stories we're about to get into. So you know what? As usual, when we have so many great guests, I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the super nerd. It is Miles.
Guys, our first guest coming up today is somebody that joined us for a podcast in season 2, and somehow our lives have now just become intertwined, and it's been one of the best, just greatest relationships that I've made through this wonderful world of podcasting. So welcome back to the show, Mathew Klickstein, and joining us for the first time today, he's the showrunner of The Simpsons, guys. You know who he is. It's Al Jean. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to Best Darn Everything.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Guys, very excited to be talking to you today. So, Matt, this might be new to you as well because, and Al, everything, this will be new to you. We started this show 5 years ago, and it's a weekly show where we review an episode of The Simpsons every week in order. And it's been a great time, but starting in season 11, we have done a spinoff where every other week we just kind of talk about something else that we really love and that we're really passionate about, and just kind of cross those worlds over. And Matt, when you reached out to me a while ago, you actually first told me about your podcast when you're like, hey, did you know that podcasts could be on IMDb? Which you were the person that taught me that, so thank you. But you introduced me to the concept of Comic-Con Begins, which is a documentary podcast that's going to be on Sirius Radio, I believe. Is that correct?
It's going to be throughout. Sirius XM is doing it, has been working with us on it for a little over a year now as an original podcast. Like so many other companies these days, they're starting to do their own original podcasts. P.S. That's actually why podcasts are now listed on IMDb, because Amazon is now doing original podcasts. And of course, as most people know, Amazon owns IMDb, has actually owned it for about 20 years now. So yeah, but Comic-Con Begins is the project. It launches June 22nd. It's a 6-part series. Each episode is about an hour, and it'll run every week for 6 weeks. But because Sirius, like so many other companies, also has been buying up a lot of other companies, they also own Stitcher, and so it'll be on Stitcher as well. And if you have a premium Stitcher, I've been told to tell everybody, you actually can get the entire bundle of all 6. So for free with ads, it's weekly starting June 22nd. But if you're premium Stitcher, then you can get the entire 6 episodes right away. And depending on how things go, we might also do some bonus episodes a little later. Just real quick, I know I'll have a chance to talk about it a little bit more. But we spoke to over 50 people, many who were involved in the con in the early days. And also a lot of kind of geeky celebrity guests, such as Mr. Al Jean. So we have like 100 hours of material, including all this archival stuff that we were given, stuff from the very first con in 1970, the con in 1975 that had people like Chuck Norris and Stan Lee and Jack Kirby there. So we have a ton of material that we had to cut down over the past year plus into these 6-hour-long episodes. So we definitely have some room for some bonus episodes and hopefully some other things a little later down the road.
So Al, as Matthew pointed out, you at this point, you run The Simpsons, and I know that you've talked fondly about how much you love doing that role. But it's good to know, I guess, that you could be a geeky celebrity guest on any future podcast if you decide you want to retire, including this one.
I'll be on IMDb too, so I can't wait.
Exactly. I want to ask you, Al, do you remember the first time you heard Matthew bring this to your attention, and what were your thoughts whenever this came to your lap?
Oh, I thought it was a great idea. I mean, Comic-Con is an institution, and it's changed so much even in the last 20 years. You know, for one thing, it's very hard to buy comic books at Comic-Con.
Talk about that.
And you know, it went from fan-driven to now like industry-driven promotion. You know, where every star in the world comes to promote their movie, and you know, people, as I have to explain, but you know, camp out for hours just to get into Hall H. And it's one of the many things in life I go, I never would have dreamed. this is what it would have worked into. It's insane.
Do you remember? I assume you've been a number of times as a professional. Have you ever gone to Comic-Con as a fan?
The first comic convention I went to, I grew up in Michigan, was in the 70s, and that was just as a kid. And you know, I was amazed because you just would see those comics for the awesome prices of $50 for Fantastic Four 1 or something, you know, just sitting out there. And the first Comic-Con I went to in San Diego was with The Simpsons in 1990 after the show had debuted. And we took a bus down from the Fox lot with Sam Simon and a bunch of the writers, and did a very long panel in the sense that the panel was a lot of people. So very little time for each person. And that was the start. And I think we've done it, not me personally every year, me personally every year since 2000, I've been there or done it virtually.
Oh, wow. So when you go as a member of the staff of The Simpsons, I know that you've got a lot of responsibilities, you've got commitments that you've got to meet for panels and things of that nature. Do you still get a chance to roam around and look at stuff that you enjoy? Is that still an option that you have in your role there at Comic-Con?
Yeah, you got to find time for that. My wife and I, she's a Simpsons writer too, will go to the Masquerade, which is always really cool at night because people spend a year sometimes working on these costumes that are incredibly elaborate, or sometimes they don't. And that's funny too. I try to walk the floor, but honestly, what's happened lately is it's physically difficult. And you know, I've had little kids, but if I had one now, I go, it would be really hard just to move them around with the sheer volume of people before pandemic that was in the hall. It's really getting nuts.
Yeah, I was about to say last year it was physically impossible to walk the halls, but you know, that was a whole different situation.
I guess I'll be nostalgic to do so again. And but yeah, you know, we were part of the virtual con last year, and it's interesting because the thing with us every year is to try to find something that makes it different from what we did the year before. Mm-hmm. So one year, like, we had Guillermo del Toro as a guest star. When we actually had Carrie Fisher as a surprise guest star. We've had a singing and dancing troupe come on. We had a huge Homer that Matt Groening got to talk to. We think about it a lot, about how to make it special every year.
Some of my favorite from like the celebrity moments too, just in general, you mentioned some of the cosplay that people do. I love, I think it was one year, Andrew Garfield, before he was like revealed as Spider-Man, came in just like a really crappy, like off like dollar store Spider-Man costume, and then like did the unmasking on stage. And then Walter White, oh my God, I'm blanking, incredible actor.
Bryan Cranston.
Bryan Cranston, thank you. Bryan Cranston came as Walter White, and of course walking around in this in his cosplay was like really good. So he was like getting people so like, wow, cool cosplay, man. And of course when he rips off the like probably $1,000 mask that he was wearing that whole day, and it's actually him underneath. Comic-Con creates some of those memories just for nerds and fans alike that are just so unique and so special. Richie and I have not had the opportunity to actually go to the San Diego Comic-Con, which is kind of the mecca, but it also has spun off so many different events, fandom cons and specific cons and wrestling con. And it's really fun for us to just be able to see any passionate group of people getting excited about stuff like that. And honestly, it's really refreshing to hear that you, who is somebody that we would be excited to go and see at a Comic-Con, also gets excited to, go and see people at Comic-Con.
Oh, well, I never get tired of seeing, the new products. And yeah, they're, when he was still with us, but, you'd see Stan Lee at a distance. That would always be exciting. And, since I've worked in animation for 30 years, almost always I'll run into like a dozen people I know if I'm just walking around.
Sure, colleagues and friends.
Yeah.
That's cool.
In the early years, when you guys were just starting out and you were going every year, what was the fan situation like for you guys? Like in the 90s, were there lots of mad fans coming into the panels, or was it something that slowly grew over the years, or how did that come about?
It's always been pretty full in the ballroom that we go to. What it always has been, and it's increased more, is people bring their kids because the kids are really excited. And Matt Green, for example, does this great thing where he draws pictures of characters, and anybody who asks a question gets an original Matt Groening drawing. And they come, kids come to ask questions, and you come to see what people are wearing. People come as comic book guy, people come as Marge, and it's just been really fun. We do the show in a small room, or when we did it in a room, where we had very little feedback from the outside world. We have table reads, but we don't have tapings. We don't have, much contact. And when you go to Comic-Con, you go, oh my gosh, there's so many people that The Simpsons means so much to. And you hear a lot of kind things. You hear like people go, when my parents were splitting up, I was watching The Simpsons to cheer myself up, which couldn't mean more. And you to get to connect with people like that about what you do for a living is a real treat.
I caught you, you had an interview with, I don't remember, I watch a lot of your interviews, so it's with somebody, but you had mentioned something that really, I thought was very sweet, and that the staff of The Simpsons, yourself included, I believe, said that it's really neat to be able to watch people with kids who watch the show growing up themselves and laughed, and then they get to share and see their kids laughing at things that they laughed at growing up, and just kind of seeing that bond that I thought was really moving and sweet. Richie and I do not have children ourselves, but we do both kind of come at this podcast when we're reviewing Simpsons episodes with that kind of mentality of comparing ourselves as kids to ourselves now as an adult, and thinking like, okay, that joke worked when I was 11 because Homer got hit in the head or the nuts or whatever. But then there's also a deeper, heavier family connection of the sacrifice that Homer's making for Lisa or Bart or whoever it happens to be in that moment.
Well, I wouldn't recommend having children just for that experience. But I have a similar thing. I remember I have two daughters. I remember I took one of them to Disneyland, and she was 2, and she saw Minnie Mouse, and she wasn't seeing a person of customer. She was seeing Minnie Mouse. It was so exciting for her that this was the actual Minnie Mouse.
Was that the first time you met your new boss, or did that?
I worked for Disney in the 90s. And we had a show called Teen Angel that was on TGIF. And what was funny about it is they had a silver pass, which enabled you to get into the theme parks, except during holidays, which is the only time I had off. So my parents lived in Orlando, and I'd take my daughter and we'd go to Epcot because that was the only park you could get into with my pass. And she'd go, Epcot again? It was really? It was the basis for an episode we did later with Marshall Wallace being Teacher of the Year.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Matt, so you are very excited about a lot of things. The way I was introduced to you is I read your book, Slime, The Oral History of Nickelodeon. And when I started reading the descriptions of Comic-Con Begins, just hearing you describe it, I kind of got that same passion vibe that you had for Nickelodeon. What was that, 15 years ago now at this point? 10 years ago?
That came out in 2013. It's crazy.
Okay, so 10 years.
But yeah, it's been almost 10 years. In fact, we did a Penguin Random House was nice enough to do a 5th anniversary edition a couple of years ago. We were trying to lining up with the 40th anniversary of Nickelodeon. We were hoping that there would maybe be a little bit more going on with that. There wasn't really, but we were able to do the 5th anniversary edition, and we had Phil Moore from Nick Arcade, of course, did a new introduction and made a few small little changes. I was hoping to do a little bit more, because just like with Comic-Con Begins and even the Springfield Confidential, which I did with Mike Reese, of course, that Al's
I'm
also in,
literally
of
it's
course.
holding it's sitting in front of me as a webcam holder right now. It's
Yeah.
how many times I've read it.
I have, whenever I work on these projects, I get intensely involved. I always interview way too many people. My interviews go on way too long. So I always have a lot of material left over. I was hoping to be able to get a little bit more of that into the new version of Slime, but it just didn't work out. But yeah, that was about 8 years ago. And yeah, of course we did Springfield Confidential with Mike Reese. And in fact, Al, you'll excuse my saying this, but I can't help but notice that Mike in the book talks about how you quote unquote rock and how you love rocking and rocking chairs. And in fact, he alleges that the first time you guys met,
out.
Mike claims that the first time you guys met, you were walking by his room in the dorm at Harvard and saw he had a rocking chair and asked if you could rock in his chair. So I can't help but think about that.
Here I am. Yeah, no, that's a lifelong passion.
It's not that he loves writing for The Simpsons. It's just they have a really nice rocking chair in the writer's room.
They did. We don't now, but there was one. Yeah, like there's a mildly famous photo of the writer's room with Conan in it, and I'm in the rocking chair with my back to the photo.
Yeah, Miles, just to kind of answer your question, though. Yeah, I feel like I've been very lucky, like yourselves, and Al knows this too, because we've talked so many times over the years, and I've been lucky enough even to get to go to the writer's room and to have lunch with him, which really was, I'm just going to say it, a lifetime dream, because I was one of those people who grew up on the show, and it was a big, big part of my life, still is. I don't know if you can see, I actually have a Simpsons article that Mike Reese wrote about our book on the wall from Wall Street Journal. But, I've worked on some projects that I'm not as interested in and are kind of assignments or whatever, got to pay the bills. But I would say the Nickelodeon book for sure, definitely the Simpsons book with Mike, and now Comic-Con Begins, which launches in June 22nd, are personal passions. And, I'm not as, I'll be honest, I'm not as interested in Comic-Con as a thing. I've only been to San Diego Comic-Con once. I was actually working on another project with Mark Summers at the time for the 30th anniversary of Double Dare with him. I was fine with being there and whatnot. What I was really interested in with Comic-Con and some of the friends that I knew who helped to create Comic-Con back in the 70s, much like with the Simpsons book, much like with the Nickelodeon book, was the community, the people behind it. One of the reasons we spoke to so many people about Comic-Con, I mean, we definitely could have done this in an hour-long show. We could have talked to 5 or 10 people, a couple of celebrities, a couple of people who helped to create it, and it would have been fine. We really wanted to delve deeply into the personal stories of the people who created Comic-Con, because one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, aside from the fact that it started in 1970, is that it was a group of high school kids. I mean, some of them were as young as 12 or 13 years old, and they were not gophers running errands. They were running the con. They were the ones running publicity. They were the ones bringing in guests. There were about 2 or 3 people. Sheldorf, of course, who's considered the founder, Ken Kruger, where they went to his comic book shop and sci-fi shop to kind of have their initial meetings, and 1 or 2 other people who kind of helped with some money and whatnot. But for the most part, it was a bunch of high school kids who, this was almost an outgrowth of just some local comic book clubs that they had. Because at the time, as Al mentioned, it was a different period, and there weren't comic book shops really, and it was hard to get comic books. And I mean, they were throwaway things. They were just, it would be like collecting People magazine issues or something like that. So you had this community that started up of people who were selling, back issues, or who were reaching out to each other through the fanzines, and who were saying, hey, I have this, do you have that? And it really was this community that sparked up. We even go all the way back to the late 30s, and people like H.P. Lovecraft and Hugo Gernsback and some of these other people who were creating these fanzines and magazines. It was almost kind of a precursor to social media, because it was the only way that fans could connect with each other, because there weren't Comic Cons, and there weren't some of the things going on right now. So that's a lot of what we delve into for this series, and why it's a 6-part series. We're basically following all these different stories and all these different personalities from the time they're in their teens, starting this little kind of outgrowth of a club. Hey, let's get Jack Kirby and Ray Bradbury to come down to San Diego, to, as Al said, what it is today, where every single big movie and TV studio comes there to launch their new trailer. So that's really what we're tracking, and the people whose lives were changed by that. And, you know, we have some interesting special guests, like I said, not just Al, but someone like Scott Aukerman, I think, is a really great example. You know, Earwolf and Comedy Bang Bang, and he helped to create Between Two Ferns and a number of other things. Great guy. We could not believe how much he had to say about Comic-Con. And a big part of it was he went to Comic-Con as early as 1985 when he was a 15-year-old kid. He grew up in Southern California. I mean, he couldn't stop talking about it. And some of our best stuff comes from Scott. And we were getting things like that from some of these other people who, you know, they're fans and they're quote unquote geeks, as they call themselves, and really care about this stuff. And from the time they were going when they were a kid to going today, where they're running panels or whatever it is, that's the kind of stuff that we were tracking and talking about in our series, and how and why those kinds of things happen. So
Really cool.
I think people are going to be really delighted by that.
Just doing the research for this conversation, I was just kind of casually looking up history of Comic-Con, things of that nature. And you kind of already touched on it, but yeah, it's a lot more rock and roll than just like nerds getting together. There's some really cool stories that I'm very excited to hear a firsthand account from your podcast. Now, I want to ask from your perspective, Matt, what was your pitch to Al and people like him when you're like, all right, I've got another one of my crackpot ideas that I'm passionate about. Let's make this happen. Tell me about that process.
You know, I joke around with Al about this sometimes. Ever since the Simpsons book with Mike Reiss, which even that now is a couple years, if you can believe it.
It's crazy.
I bug Al all the time. In fact, you know, I'll tell him when I see a new episode that I really like, or a joke in it that I really like. You know, you know, I'll hit him up and say, hey, have you seen this movie? Or, oh, hey, I just read this and it reminded me of this, that, or the other. I mean, we kind of almost have a pen palship going on. And, you know, I've been really grateful and appreciative of people like Al and a few other people that I've interviewed or gotten to know over the years, some of which I've become much closer than others, some of which I've worked with again. Because, you know, I get very involved in these interviews and these interviewees, and people like Al are very accessible and easy to reach out to. And Al, I think I've even told you this before, but it always surprises me. I'll hit you up about something and you always get back to me like right away. And I'm just sitting there going like, are you running one of the most complicated shows? Like, are you like 15-hour, 20-hour days right now? How do you have time to email a random, you know, friend and fan to, you know, who's just saying, hey, I like this episode. And to Al's credit, he always gets back to me, always right away. So I think some of it is, we had a little bit of a relationship already. So that one was a little bit of an easier ask. I knew that Al was into Comic-Con and into comics and kind of pop culture stuff. So that one was a little easier. I think it was just a matter of, hey, I'm doing this thing for SiriusXM. Would love to have you involved. Some of the other people, it was a little bit of a harder get. I mean, as with any one of my projects, I have to go through so many different channels and do so many different things. In this case, Sirius was nice enough to reach out to a few people. Felicia Day, that's how we got Scott Aukerman, the Russo brothers, which were really cool to talk to. Bruce Campbell, he was fantastic.
I believe I saw Kevin Smith, who's another person I'm a huge fan of.
Kevin Smith, we got, I actually worked on a different documentary with some of the guys from Mr. Skin, which was something I did years ago as part of an assignment. And they did this really great documentary that's much better and more sophisticated and respectable than it sounds, but it's a documentary on the history of nudity in cinema, going all the way back to the silent days when most movies were actually nude because they were kind of art films and whatnot and sort of models of bodies and so forth. So they did this entire documentary that's actually on Hulu right now, Skin, the history of nudity in cinema. And Kevin was one of the people who was in there. And I actually suggested they talk to him about Zach and Miri Make a Porno. And he agreed. And so I actually just hit them up and I said, hey, we're doing this Comic-Con oral history. I can't do it without Kevin Smith. Can you guys please help? They connected me to Kevin's people. Immediately they got back to me. I mean, when you're doing an oral history of something like Comic-Con, it can sometimes be a little easier. We got Neil Gaiman almost right away. Frank Miller was a little bit of a harder get because, as a lot of people know, he's a bit of an elusive guy and has, you know, some interesting background and whatnot.
The John Swartzwelder of comic books, if you will.
Yeah, right. So, some were a little harder than others. But for the most part, once I said we're doing the Comic-Con oral history, we're doing it with SiriusXM. It's going to be, this extensive thing. We always knew it was going to be 6 or 7 episodes. We really wanted to delve deep into the history of it and the personal stories and whatnot. It was actually one of the easier projects that I got into. And, I hate to say it, but I'm just going to say it. I think, frankly, the fact that it was COVID and lockdown, which certainly made a lot of this very, very difficult to do for various reasons. But, people weren't in production on things. People weren't traveling around the world touring. They weren't promoting events. I think some people liked doing this with us, and some people were actually more helpful than others because I think it gave them kind of something to do, something to look forward to. So certainly COVID and pandemic, and lockdown made things a lot more difficult across the board, but certain things like that, it was a little bit easier. So
COVID has obviously been a rough time for a lot of people, a scary thing, but I do think in a weird way, it shed some light on some things that could theoretically be better moving forward, just in general day-to-day life. And then also made availability to some people that might not otherwise have it. But something you touched on there about Al that I was wanting to talk about anyway was, Al, you were like just this famous hard worker. Like, you're famous for a lot of reasons, but like, one of the things that people that know about your career know about you is you have been a hard worker your entire life. I believe that you credit that to your father making you work in his hardware store, right, unless you basically got to work doing other stuff. Is that the secret? You just work your ass off? Is there anything else that you have that like you would advise for people that want to pursue what you do?
Yeah, the biggest secret of television is not giving up and working hard. And if you happen to be blessed to be on a success like The Simpsons, there's tons of work. There's always stuff to do. So the biggest thing is to never get overwhelmed by it, and also to decide things pretty quickly. So I would credit maybe a little ADD helping me. And the people that you see that are successful in television is because they're very persistent, and they're comedy writers, they're funny, but they also go through a lot to get to where they are, and it doesn't happen by accident. And The Simpsons secret, we've had brilliant people, obviously, all the way through, but everybody, not just the writers, the directors, took it so seriously. Every director goes, this is my Simpsons episode, this is going to be around forever. I don't want it to be anything less than great. As showrunner, I've run it for 22 years. Co-write it now with Matt Selman, but my fear was always I'd be the one when the show ended, and I didn't want to be that person, and I guess maybe I won't. So that's mission accomplished for me. I never dreamed it would last 32 plus years, but it's funny because when you're working that hard, and many of the same people, like Mike Reese still works on the show, it doesn't seem like 30 years. I can go into the room, and I was just there with Conan. He came by to visit, and it felt like 30 years ago, right immediately. We were remembering those.
Did you stick him back in the closet and have him start punching up scripts immediately?
I wish. I would if I could. I don't think we could afford even. I was just gonna say.
I have to interject here real quick, because just for listeners of the show, I'm sure a lot of people are aware of this, but maybe a lot of others are not. There's a pretty decent documentary that came out a couple of years ago called simply Showrunner, and it really goes into what it takes to be a showrunner. And they talk to a lot of different, showrunners of some big shows. And again, Miles, I'm sure you guys and Richie are aware of this. Maybe some of your listeners are, some aren't. But being a showrunner of a TV series is supposed to be one of the hardest jobs out there, especially in Hollywood. I think it has something like 100% fail rate. Everyone just goes completely crazy and nuts. We talk about it a little bit in Mike's book, and how he put on 70 pounds while he was working on it, and just so much that you have to do. And for a lot of people who might not be aware, obviously Al can talk about this better than I, but you're not just working with the writers, you're doing so many different things, and budgets and the studio and all this stuff, that Al, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you must be one of the longest running showrunners period in Hollywood history, because I know most people can't do it more than like 3 or 4 years because it just kills you. Obviously, a lot of it's because of how long Simpsons has gone for, which has been record breaking too. But I just want to bring it up because I think it's really important. I mean, Al, you running The Simpsons for 22 years, that's got to be a record breaker.
And I have to guess it is because there are very few shows that have even lasted 20 plus years. I don't think they've had the same showrunner on Law and Order or the same showrunner on Family Guy for the whole time. So whatever record that is, that's me. I'm the Calvin.
I mean, to Matt's point too, like just looking at just The Simpsons, I don't think any other showrunner did it for more than 3 seasons in total. And I mean, you've had multiple runs now and have been consistently for over the whole last decade plus. Like it's an incredible feat. Like that is something that I do. Matt already said it, but yeah, showrunner honestly sounds like it makes sense. Like you're running the show, but I think people are like, yeah, showrunner, whatever. Like that is a huge process. You are taking so many departments and making them blend and work seamlessly. While telling, Fox at the time, Disney now to, keep your notes or whatever. It's great.
Well, I like to say if you're the showrunner and something goes wrong, it's your fault. Whatever happens on the show, the hardest part of it, and it's, a great thing to be, but is people are constantly, giving you new problems you didn't expect to happen. A certain actor might have jury duty, the day of and you think that wouldn't be a big
just
problem.
Make an episode about it, whatever character happened to be voiced by them. Hope it's not Hank Azaria, or that's the entire jury.
Yeah, just crazy different stuff that comes up. And we know we've never missed an air date. We've never shut down. Even, COVID, we didn't miss a day. We went right on to Zoom. So that's the thing I'm proudest of is that we just kept it going, and it's picked up for 2 more years.
That's incredible. Congrats on that, by the way. Now that we have successfully, you guys are not in any danger of getting cut off short at this point. Are there any memorable moments in the show's history that you, as the showrunner, like you said, you've got to keep calm and, be the captain of the ship, keep steering forward or whatever, but do you remember a specific time where in your head you were just like, oh my God, what the hell is happening right now? I'm like, things are about to blow up and it's all going to land right here on top of me.
Well, the kind of weird thing that would happen is season 4, we sent out 2 episodes, Camp Krusty and Streetcar Named Marge, to critics. And somebody in New Orleans got a hold of the New Orleans song in Streetcar where, we call them pirates, drunks, and horror. It's supposed to be, this is a bad song about New Orleans. Written by Jeff Martin, who's, our great songwriter, who's written so many over the years. And New Orleans took it out of context and said they're attacking our city. So before the season starts, they said, like, the Simpsons hate New Orleans. And that's, one of the advantages of Bart writing on the chalkboard is you can apologize before the episode even airs. And you just never know what will happen like that. One that was, like, smaller, but maybe a little more important was when there was a kid who had Tourette's syndrome, and we did a show about it, and he was very sad. He said, "Is this something bad I have?" And so we changed that. We didn't refer to it as Tourette's syndrome in the reruns. And you forget how wide the scope of the show is, or how a little thing can be, turn into a huge deal. Just recently, there was an episode with Morrissey. It wasn't really Morrissey. It was like a fake, character. But he decided to be hugely offended, and it became this enormous deal. And that happens with The Simpsons all the time. It's crazy, like how little things become headlines around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We see all of those come through on our Twitter feeds, of course, and whatnot, and a lot of those little controversies. And it must be just impossible to try as like a comic writer to make a show that is so universally accepted. This is a global phenomenon. Much like Comic-Con has become also. I want to segue to that in a minute, but much like the Simpsons is like a global phenomenon. So like to try to constantly be writing through a filter of not upsetting any, or not, I guess not punching down on anybody. You're probably comfortable with upsetting a few people, but not punching down on somebody in a bullying sense. Like that just becomes infinitely more difficult whenever you have to look through so many different lenses. And constantly be reevaluating those things.
Well, there's definitely a lot more scrutiny different things get, and people scrutinize jokes that we wrote 30 years ago, not all of which fit the zeitgeist of today. And, how could we?
Of course.
Yeah. I always thought from the beginning we were a show that meant well, that was sticking up for the little person, that was, trying to take down corporations and big government. But, believed in families and believed in people. So I think people have seen that the heart of the show is pretty pure.
Awesome. Before we cut back to the Comic-Con, I do have one question. I really didn't want to talk to you too much about The Simpsons. I'm sure you're probably a little tired of talking about it. But when we actually had Carolyn Omine on the show not too long ago, and she shared with us that Lisa Simpson is essentially the voice of the writer's room in a lot, or the feelings of the writer's room in a lot of episodes. Do you feel that that's true to you as well?
Yeah, most of the episodes I've written that I have a writing credit on are Lisa episodes. And when I grew up, I wasn't Bart. My sister was Bart. She was like, cool and would lip off to my dad and say, Grace, rub it up, thanks for the grub and things like that. I was a quiet person reading and, thinking about things. So a lot of the writers tend to gravitate to that persona, maybe even a little too much, that we put our thoughts in her mouth. But
is that why Lisa often sounds like a man in her 50s?
Yeah. Well, we have this debate because obviously she's supposed to be a kid who's 8, but even from the Christmas episode, there's a very long speech she has talking about, I think her aunts and it was written by Jim Brooks, and it's very beyond the years of most 8-year-olds. Also, 8-year-olds, I've had 2 8-year-old daughters. They're pretty smart.
Kids are a lot brighter than people realize, and they absorb everything. It's honestly scary. Very scary. Very cool. Yeah. I always tell people I was a wannabe Bart when I was a kid, that now I like to think of myself as more of a Lisa, but I'm definitely, if I'm being honest with myself, just turning into Homer slowly.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
Yeah, except me, because I'm turning into Grandpa. So I'm ahead of that.
Looking forward to your interview yelling at clouds later. Can't wait to hear that.
I sympathize with that all the time. That attitude.
It really does. It is very fitting. So a couple of things, Matt, that I read. I'm confident that your series is going to expand on all of these facts. But just looking out, you already kind of talked on Comic Cons are not like this new concept. Fan meetups have been documented since the 1930s. It was 1970 when what became Comic Con, the Golden State Comic Mini Con, was formed in I want to say it was like a hotel basement in San Diego.
Yep.
This random fact, probably because Google has been following my previous searches, just popped up. But in 1978, young cartoonist Matt Groening attended his first Comic Con at the time, working on the series Life in Hell. I wonder what happened to that guy. But it was in the 90s that it moved to become it moved into the convention center, and it became the Comic Con that we know today. Obviously that's what, 51 years of history, is that right? 52 years at this point.
Yeah, I mean, my only regret with this whole entire series is that we didn't do it a little earlier, because they actually did have a 50th anniversary kind of extravaganza at the 2019 con. And
good timing to get that in.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. But, for us, we just missed it. And that would have been such an amazing time to release a show like this. In fact, it did help us, though, I will say, because one of the reasons that we were able to talk to, 30, 40 people who were involved in the con in those early days is many of them have stayed very much in touch and have remained very close to each other. They've worked together. They've helped each other out. But a lot of them, kind of went on and did their own thing. But the 50th anniversary brought everyone together, reunion style. And one of my good friends over the years, Wendy All, who's also our historical consultant on this project and has been involved in the con since the mid-70s, she basically had the black book of everyone's phone numbers, emails, addresses, and she was able to fill in a lot of gaps at that event. She, of course, at the time didn't know we were going to be doing this show. But when I first got in touch with her about it, she basically said, hey, I can get in touch with virtually everybody, because due to the 50th anniversary, I got back in touch with a lot of people I hadn't seen in years. So I do regret that we weren't smart enough to have this, getting going for the 50th anniversary a few years ago. But it did help us in the end with this. And they also had a really big event in the 40th anniversary as well in 2009. And in fact, Jackie Estrada, who some people probably know, has been running the Eisner Awards, which are kind of like the Oscars of the comics that are done at the Comic-Con every year. Jackie's been running that since the late 80s. She put out this really great souvenir book that I can't recommend highly enough. It's literally, I think, just called the 40th Anniversary Comic-Con. I think you get it on Amazon and a few things like that. Sergio Aragones did the cover art, beautiful cover art, and it was kind of the Bible for me. And I give Jackie a little special credit at the end of every episode as well. Jackie was great. One of the few people who actually remains still very involved in the con to this day. So many other people, a lot of people left. When I say they were teenagers and high schoolers, I mean it. A lot of people stopped being involved in Comic-Con when they went to college. I mean, suddenly they were moving on with their lives. Even some people went up to just Los Angeles and they started working in Hollywood. They started working for Hanna-Barbera, for Disney, for other channels and whatnot, started doing other things, and they just didn't have the time or the energy to come back down to the con every year. So a lot of people moved on as early as 18, 19, 20 years old. And in fact, due to how long everything took and due to these people being the foundational members of the Comic-Con back in 70, and now it's this billion-dollar franchise, one of the questions I asked everybody, and that we have a little bit of it at the end of the entire series, spoiler alert, is I actually said to everyone, did you ever get paid? What's that like to have done this thing back in the day? And now it went from, this little group of friends getting together to celebrate Kirby and Brave Bradbury and a few other people to this billion-dollar franchise. Every single person across the board said no. They said they do not regret it at all. They never expected any money. It was always a nonprofit from day one. Their whole goal was to get other people to become nerds and geeks. Their big secret mission was to help the geeks win, and they won.
I was going to say, I think that's mission accomplished pretty solidly. Yeah. And somewhat ironic that, at that time they were, not caring about Hollywood or they just wanted to shed light on these comics. And now comics are the most profitable part of Hollywood. I mean,
yeah, well, that's true. Although another thing, you can actually hear it in our trailer. I will say, and I would have let it go, but it's such an important part of the story. Not true. Hollywood, animation, magic, wrestlers, Bruce Lee, martial arts, yo-yos, dancing, costuming, early versions of what was LARP. There was something called the Society for Anachronism, Historical Anachronism, basically would become kind of LARPing and sort of really into like hobbits and such. Those were all there at the earliest cons. In fact, as you can kind of hear in the trailer, and as we talk about Shel Dorf, who had come from Detroit, where Al was sort of his stomping grounds back in the day, he had something called the Detroit Fanfare, and it was called the Triple Fanfare because it was not just comics, but also animation and film. And indeed, at the very beginning, they had Hollywood presence there. They had TV and movies. One thing that makes probably a little more sense to people is even though Star Trek had already been canceled by the time Comic-Con got going, as early as 1973, they already had a special section just for Star Trek.
Trekkies.
And,
wow.
Yeah. I mean, 1970, by the way, 1974, 75, they were already bringing in people like Frank Capra. They were bringing in people like Chuck Norris. They were showing, old Bruce Lee movies. Chuck Norris comes to the Comic-Con in 1975, and he's talking about, working with Bruce Lee, and he's talking about Bruce Lee's death, what really happened, quote unquote, and all these other things. I mean, so that was going on at the earliest days. And of course, animation, and I know Al probably knows this and appreciates this, but they were bringing in June Foray. They were bringing in Bob Clampett. They were bringing in Dawes Butler. They were bringing in Chuck Jones. I mean, and these were people who were regulars. I mean, they were practically part of the con very, very early on. So one of the things that we're hoping to really dispel about people's take on Comic-Con is that idea of, Comic-Con is no longer just about comics. As we say in the trailer, and as I said throughout the entire series, it was never just
about. It never really was. That's great.
And I think that's important too, Miles. I'll just say this too, and I love some of the people we talked to, like Al, about this, who understands this and knows this, and this is a big part of The Simpsons too, is that what it really was it was a pop culture con before anyone said the phrase pop culture. That's what it really was. It was geek culture before anyone said the phrase geek culture, when it was still bad to be a geek. I mean, yeah, we go back as far as not just with the 30s conventions, such, which, by the way, the 30s conventions and 40s conventions were science fiction based. They weren't really comic conventions. They were science fiction conventions. So you had people like, again, Asimov and Ray Bradbury and people like that who are really being celebrated, or monster movies, King Kong, Godzilla, things like, of that nature. That's what they're really into. The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the old Universal monster movies. I mean, that's what they were celebrating. And just so happened, surprise, surprise, these kids were also really into comic books. They were also really into Mad Magazine. They were really into Twilight Zone. They were really into Lost in Space. They eventually really got into Star Trek. And of course, a little later on, Star Wars. Star Wars comes to Comic-Con as early as 1976. They actually came a year early. And it was really, we talk about this in the series too. In a lot of ways, it was the first kind of geek focus group. George Lucas and team were kind of smart enough to say, hey, there's this group of kids down in San Diego, a few miles south of us here in LA and whatnot, and Northern California, who are getting together to celebrate stuff like this. Let's go and see what they have to say about this movie, which we're calling for now the Star Wars, and see what they have to say about it. And sure enough, everyone just loved Star Wars, made a big fuss about it and everything, and the rest is history. But we're pretty sure that was the first time that someone figured out, let's go and let the geeks see the film, and not only will they give us some good feedback, but maybe they'll market it for us too.
Yeah.
For free.
So that was even before
the 76.
That was even before, like, now, where like Twitter, like one of y'all tweets something. Well, you don't, Matt, but I'll tweet something, I retweet it, and it just starts spreading in this crazy manner. But back then it was all word of mouth, and it is crazy to think that again your point, a room full of geeks in the 1970s not only turned into Comic-Con, but now there are specific cons for each of those properties that you just mentioned. Star Wars has conventions just for Star Wars. Star Trek, wrestling I've been to a few of those that are phenomenally fun. And you also talked about Al's love of animation, and I've even seen animation cons where people can go and say you're a developing artist and you want to learn from the pros on how to animate better, I guess, which now I would assume is on computers. I don't know, I don't draw, but it's
unless you're Don Hertzfeld.
It's incredible to me, though, that like it's spread out that much, that all of us can find that niche thing that we're like, oh, I want to go be around people that love this thing as much as I do. Which brings me two questions for Al. One, in animation in general, do you just have any fond memories of any con moments that revolve around your love of animated shows or just animation in general? And two, is there, and I'm just dumb, should have done more research, or are we ever going to get a Simpsons con?
It's really weird because, Star Trek was not nearly as popular as The Simpsons when it aired. And of course, there have been Star Trek conventions all over the world. I think that the general feeling is that it gets now folded in either to Comic-Con or, Disney now owns us. So there are so many Disney franchises, they have a D23 every other year. And I would love it. There was actually a store when the show opened that only sold Simpsons merchandise in Westwood. It lasted for about a year, which is, again, one of those things I never thought I would see. But I don't see any plan for a Simpsons con specifically, but I don't see why not, because it's just, there are very few things that have as much of a worldwide appeal as The Simpsons.
I know a few people who might be interested.
Yeah, no. Well, I can say my little story on animation at the con is when The Critic came out, we had a little booth, Mike and I, promoting that show with John Lovitz. And it wasn't Star Wars. It didn't become an enormous success. But we also went to Comic-Con in the early 90s to promote and gave away buttons and t-shirts. And it was a thrill because, you're reaching your audience, so easily here, everybody that you want to watch your show. And I've missed, not having a physical con to go to this year and last. It definitely was just something where you'd always see something new that you didn't know, or, learn something, buy something that you hadn't had. And it was always something interesting.
That's really cool. You kind of touched on something too there that I want to get to. We've already talked a few times now. Comic-Con was not a live event last year. It was, I know you did a Zoom panel with several of the other creators of The Simpsons that was really entertaining, but it wasn't that same experience that people get to come together physically and enjoy each other's company and stories and all that. So my question to both of you is, assuming the next Comic-Con that we get to actually attend in person, aside from professional responsibilities, promoting things, of course, or talking about the show, as a fan, as a nerd, as a geek, if you will, what is the thing that you are most, and Richie, I want you to answer this too. What is the thing that you all are most looking forward to doing the next time you get to go to whatever nerd convention it is that you're so lucky to attend?
For me, just walking around, the whole pandemic has just been very isolating to everybody. And I've gotten, now out to a couple ball games, and you just feel like, oh my God, I took this for granted. This is so amazing to be able to do it again. And I don't take it for granted. Also, I think pre-pandemic, Comic-Con was probably the journiest place in the world. I'm going to be interested how much Purell they load up for Comic-Con this next year, because I think it's like a smart idea to be a little more careful. But everything has to be scheduled and on Zoom, and you don't have a random encounter with somebody, and I miss that very much.
Very much. What about you, Matt?
Hard to say. I really am more of an intimacy junkie. I mean, I love traveling. I love talking to a lot of different people. I've really appreciated the relationship that we've had over the years, Miles, you and me and Richie, and you guys were nice enough to come out to our Mark Summers documentary when we did at the Alamo in Austin.
That was fun.
God, even that was 3-4 years ago. Becoming friends with people like Al, actually getting to go out to LA, like I said, and going to the writer's room and going to the commissary and eating lunch with him and that kind of thing, and seeing some other people there. So for me, I'm the kind of guy who I like to go to the bar a little earlier when it's just me and a couple people and I'm kind of hanging out with the bartenders and the people working there. I like to go to the coffee shops when they're a little less crowded. I'm the kind of guy who goes to the movie theater, when I'm able to, like a Tuesday morning or something like that. Also, a lot of places it's a little cheaper when you go at that time or when they're open.
I also am frugal, so I'm with you on that one.
Let me just say, if that's you, Comic-Con on Saturday is not for you.
I think Comic-Con
no
in
matter
general,
what time you show up.
the actual Comic-Con for me is not exactly my cup of tea, but I will say that, and we talk about this in the series because there are a lot of people, even people like Neil Gaiman actually brings this up, and a few others. It's sort of a little bit like what Al said, where, not only is it hard to get around now because it's just so crowded, but when you are a renowned celebrity and people know what you look like, they know who you are, it's hard for people like Gaiman to go there and just walk around and be himself because everyone's running up to him, everyone wants to touch him and get his autograph and everything else. So we had a number of people, Kevin Smith brought this up, Felicia Day, and a few others who said that they didn't necessarily say it ruined their con experience, but they definitely miss when things were more intimate. And people like Neil, who of course have been going since the mid 80s, would tell stories about, just seeing other people there who were professionals. And a lot of the people we talked to talked about that, where there was a time when you could actually go up and say hello to Stan Lee and talk with him and, hey, do you want to go and get a drink? And he would do that because it wasn't 120,000 people. It was 1,000 people or 2,000 people. And from the very, very start, as I said, I mean, Ray Bradbury, Kirby, Forey Ackerman, they were there at the earliest cons. A little later, Neil Adams and people like that were coming. So, it was, everyone was there together. And we have these great stories of another part of how the con was just as much about film as anything else. You have to remember there was no DVR back then. There was no streaming services. There weren't even DVD players or VCRs. And you had these kids who were fanboys and fangirls of movies too. They wanted to watch King Kong. They wanted to watch these other movies. So one of the things that you got to do at the con was they would have a projection room running 24/7. And because you had all these AV kids and kids who worked at movie theaters and stuff, they would, borrow 35 millimeter prints of some of these films and they would have these screenings going on. So a lot of people went to the con to see movies that they hadn't seen in a long time or that they hadn't heard, that they never got a chance to see in the theater. And we have stories of people who were like, yeah, I was sitting there watching such and such at 2 a.m, and Theodore Sturgeon's on one side of me, and Jack Kirby's on the other side of me, and Neil Adams is in front of me, and Bradbury's in back of me. And I'm just sitting there as like this 16-year-old kid, excited about the movie, but also like, oh my gosh, look who's sitting with me. And obviously that kind of thing is not necessarily going to be going on today at the con. So to bring it back to the con, and my own thing is just that intimacy. I'm coming out to LA for an event in September for something, hoping to meet up with people like Al and others, if you guys are available and whatnot, and, making some other meetings. So just to get to see people again, to have that intimate connection, to go to lunch, to go and to grab coffee, or if I were to go to a convention, just to say hello to somebody, shake their hand, give them a hug. I mean, that's the part of it that I really miss and that you really can't duplicate over Zoom or an email. It's one of the many reasons I'm not on social media, is I really want that actual connection. And I think that that's something really special. And I'm looking forward to, for sure, when I start traveling again and going to some of these places.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
with you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please, Al, you go ahead.
Matt Groening is very appreciative of his fans, and he always tries to give someone an autograph if they ask. But he can't go on Comic-Con's floor for more than a second without getting swarmed. It actually just stops the traffic. So he now has to have somebody like, 2 people, clearing traffic for him. It is a totally different thing. And
you just have to get 2 smaller celebrities who will detract a little bit of focus from him, right? Like just kind of like satellites going around him.
I in defense of someone like Stan Lee, like he would have gotten like just mobbed, and never let out, in the last few years if he was on the floor alone.
I just have to say real quick, because it was such a fun story. We had a few people talk about this, and I know that these kind of things have gotten out in interviews and such in the past, but we have a few people who say, like, you never know who's under that stormtrooper mask walking around. Yeah. And we have a few people saying, like, yeah, definitely when Jack Black goes, or when certain people like that go, like, they go in costume. So there are people like that who, really embrace the costume aspect and are able to go. We have people talking about it. We have people talking about their friends who go and who get dressed up so that they can go and have, a few hours of actual con experience, which I think is cool, because again, you never know who you're walking next to. You never know who you're sitting next to at a Comic-Con, but also it just shows, how much these people go through to go and have the con. I mean, listening to Scott Aukerman talk about it, listening to Neil Gaiman talk about it, even Frank Miller, who, sometimes can come off as a little bit curmudgeonly or antisocial. I was a little nervous talking to him, but he was actually the sweetest, nicest, most gentle guy, at least when I talked to him. Sure. When they go, they miss the fact that they don't have the regular con experience. So some of them will just wear a costume, and that allows them to go and really enjoy it. So these are lifetime geeks and nerds and fanboys and fangirls, because they want to go. I mean, Aukerman tells this funny story about only a few years ago that Aziz Ansari tried to cut in a line and the bouncer wouldn't let him. And Aziz actually said, but I'm, kind of famous. And they're like, no. I mean, now, a little later, it's a little bit different, but
probably gets a little more cool now. Story. Yeah, people dress there now as like Captain America, not because they like the shield, but because they like the shield. Yeah.
Right so in all your guys' Comic-Con experience, has there been any like outfits or costumes or cosplay that really stood out in your mind where you're like, oh my gosh, that's incredible, or holy crap, that's really scary?
It wasn't a Comic-Con, it was at a promotion event for The Simpsons in the Netherlands, Simpsons movie, where the Netherlands people are extremely tall. So there were 24 women who were already 6 feet tall with Marge hairdos. And Matt Groening turned to me and he said, if you think this is weird, just remember Marge is based on my mother.
That's incredible. I know I want to be respectful of you guys' time, and we're going to wrap up real quick. Since I asked Rich, what's your favorite thing you're looking forward to when we get back to cons?
Oh man, it's honestly revolves around the question that I just asked. When we went to when we went to the Dallas Fan Expo, Miles's leg was broken, so we were there for like 4 hours with him on a cast, walking around with crutches. But seeing everybody's creativity, and like there are a lot of I guess Overwatch has been popular for a while, but there are a lot of Overwatch cosplay that's really good. But like even the simplest thing, there is this family of 5 dressed up as the main family from Bob's Burgers, and I would have never thought that it would make a great cosplay because they're such simple outfits, but like The dude even have his mustache trimmed, and like someone had the little bunny ears on as Luis, and like something that simple just looked really, really good. And seeing how creative everybody can be on both ends of the spectrum, like that's a lot of the fun is going there. It's honestly, I think I would like it if it was like the old days where it's a lot less people. That intimacy aspect really seems cool. But again, the more people, the more creativity you have, so you can't really knock that.
The whole time Matt was talking about like that old room of like nerds pre-internet, pre-everything, I'm just like, can you imagine if you had like a time traveler just like brought a cell phone with like Disney Plus and Netflix and was like, yeah, by the way, the whole Marvel verse is on here now. Like, Marvel verse, what? It's just kind of mind blowing to think about how far it's come. My thing I'm looking forward to most kind of combines Al's and Richie's. I like the interaction with people that you just can't get anywhere else. I in my day-to-day life, I live for awkward encounters socially. So those types of things, I just get a lot of fun. I find a lot of humor and joy in those experiences that you can't get on Zoom, as Matt said, that you despite the germs, as Al said, you just want to push through and go and have that connection with people. But we do want to be respectful of your time today, guys. I really appreciate you both being here. Al, is an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you, sir. I really enjoyed having you here today. And Matt, it's always a pleasure getting to see you, my friend. Al, you probably don't really need the Twitter followers, but would you like to plug anything? Do you have any projects? I mean, obviously, I think The Simpsons is still plugging along, but do you have anything else you'd like to share?
We have something extremely comic book related that's coming up soon, but I can't reveal it just yet, which has been kind of a lifelong dream to do. I was just going to...
we don't mind being the exclusive drop of this news if you really want to.
You'll know when you see it.
It won't offend us.
I can name drop one more time. I've been talking about a phone, or someone coming from the past. In 2001, I got to have lunch with Stan Lee, and I said, man, I've been waiting for a Spider-Man movie all my life. And he said, so have I. And, wow. It's just astounding. Like, this thing that, and I still have my comic books from the 60s, and I go, it became the biggest thing in the world. And it's just, I never would have dreamed it.
That's incredible. I mean, just to be able to have lunch with the man, Stan the Man. I mean, he's maybe the most key figure of nerd culture of any one person that just kind of like wraps all of the different fandoms that we've talked about today, even though he's not directly related to animation. Like so much has come around comic books, and that's incredible. Honestly, that's just really cool.
He was super funny. Very, very much missed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Really touching. If you guys have watched Loki, they did a nice little tribute in the mural in the background of the place that Loki. I don't want to like spoil anything, but Loki is in prison somewhere, and there's a mural in the background that pays tribute to Stan Lee. That's very sweet. So that's kind of fun that they are keeping that tradition going forward. Definitely follow Al on Twitter if you don't already. I'm assuming if you listen to this podcast, you probably already do, but that's where I get a lot of my Simpsons news. So keep up with that. Matt, I know you're not on social media. Obviously, you're here to plug Comic-Con Begins. So please plug that. Tell everybody about where they can find it. And of course, as always, anything else that you'd like to share with our fans.
Yeah, so the trailer for Comic-Con Begins is up now. You can find it, throughout SiriusXM's ever-expanding network. They also own Earwolf now, and I think there's already stuff going on through Earwolf and Stitcher, certainly. Like I said, they want me to make sure everyone knows that if you have premium Stitcher, you get the full entire package, all 6 episodes, right when we launch.
You don't want to wait week to week. You want to binge watch. You want to binge listen to the whole
thing.
All
go together really well.
It's a no-brainer.
We put together
instant gratification. That's what we're all about here at Best on Everything. You're best on everything.
We put together the original script, which was hundreds of pages of all the stuff all the selects that we pulled from all the interviews, and gosh, even that now was months ago, as kind of one long script. Would make a great book. P.S. But anyway, so it does all go together really, really well, as so many of my other projects do in that regard. And I will say too, I just another little spoiler alert for anyone who's actually gotten this far. We actually have in our series a little later down the road, Al talking about meeting up with Stan Lee and that experience. And I will just say this as a nice little tease. We were able to use a clip from the 1975 con of Stan Lee himself also talking about the upcoming Spider-Man movie as early as 1975. It sounded like it was going to be a little different than what ended up happening.
Changes, yeah.
So it's a perfect, right when Al said that,
A young
like,
Sam Raimi was in the corner of the room taking notes that day.
Yeah, so no, Stan had a slightly different vision of what the Spider-Man movie would be in 1975, but it butts up right against what Al was just saying. So I think that's going to be fun. And Al, I can't wait for you to hear that in the actual show.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Comic-Con begins throughout the Sirius network. Of course, anywhere else you get your podcasts, Apple and all that other stuff. I will say, as always, as we all have to do now, if you listen to it, if you like it, even if you don't, please give us 5 stars. You know, all that kind of stuff helps with algorithms and things. But I will just say this. In fact, I'm not even going to plug any of the other things I'm working on right now, although as usual, it's always a lot. We put so much into this damn thing. I've worked on documentaries. I've worked on books. I've helped people with their books like Mike Reese and Mr. Skin and others. And I've worked on TV. I've worked in film. I've done all these different things over the years. It's what my whole career has been about. And I've never worked on something as hard, as passionately, as deeply as Comic-Con begins. So if anyone enjoys some of the other projects I've done, if they like Springfield Confidential or Slime or any of these other things, this is it. And part of it, and I've said this for a while now, in a lot of ways, it's almost the culmination of everything I've ever done. This is not just about Comic-Con. This is about geek culture. This is about fandom. This is about pop culture going all the way back to the 30s, as we said. And so it's Star Trek, it's Simpsons, it's Star Wars, it's Twilight, it's Iron Man, it's everyone and everything. It's underground comics, it's Hanna-Barbera. It is the history of fandom. And the reason why it worked with the Comic-Con thing is these were the kids back in the 60s and 70s who really pushed what fandom would be in the future. And to help do that, their business convention, if you will, every year, so that everyone could get together and celebrate it, happened to be the San Diego Comic-Con. So the people we talked to, some of them very directly helped to keep, Star Trek, going early on, before they even got involved in the con. And that's how they got involved in the con. Hey, we did the letter writing campaign to keep Star Trek going for season 3, or just other people like that. So we talked to like the first wave and second wave of fandom of people who were there in the 30s and 40s, who knew H.P. Lovecraft and knew all these other people, and, were really involved when they were, 10, 11, 12, 13, when they were just kids. So I'm very excited for this to come out. I'm really looking forward to people checking it out. I can't wait to hear what people like Al and some of the others who were nice enough to give us some time to talk with us and do things like this. And I'm just really grateful that SiriusXM worked with us on this. Because it needed to happen. It's the largest pop culture event worldwide, clocked by Guinness, not once but twice. So I'm not just saying that. It's not just a marketing ploy. It is the largest. Yeah. And I can't wait for people to hear, just what it meant to be a fan back in that day, and people who are now in their 70s and 80s. And yeah, it's like the cell phone thing that you talked about, to go from I'm getting in trouble reading a science fiction book in class, or I got an F on my paper because my teacher didn't like that I did a report on Martian Chronicles, to, you better know every single thing about the Marvel universe if you want to be successful in Hollywood today. That's the story that we're clocking. And we have the people who were there from day one and who were part of that happening, along with people like Al and Neil Gaiman, Frank Miller, and others, to say, hey, thanks to those people, we're able to do what we're doing now. We're all geeks. We're all fans. Some of us now run The Simpsons. Some of us now are making the big Marvel movies like the Russo brothers, and people like Bruce Campbell, who is a lifelong fan also, talks about Sam Raimi and how he grew up, reading Spider-Man, and, now he got to make Spider-Man movies and such. So that's what this series is about. I'm so excited for people to check it out. And I hope it goes big. And just know we put a lot into it, a lot more than we probably should have, and really a lot more than what we got paid for. But it was well worth it, because it's everything. It is the pop culture story, and we're very excited about it.
Well, we're both very excited to hear it. I really can't wait. And guys, we are so grateful to both you, Al Jean and Mathew Klickstein, for joining us here today. And we're grateful to all the people who tune in and listen to this show every week. We really appreciate you supporting us and joining us in our nerd culture community that we're cultivating here with Best Darn Diddley and Best Darn Everything. As always, make sure you follow Richie the Whiz Kid at @thewiz_kid23.
Make sure you follow Miles at Mr. Most Days Off. Most importantly, outside of Al Jean, Follow at Best Darn Diddly. That's Diddly. I do want to throw in one last question. We did this with Mike when he was on the show about a year ago. Al, during the pandemic, what were you watching?
We were just talking about my wife and I. The Last Dance was my favorite thing. The Michael Jordan documentary.
Yeah, that was really good.
That was really good. Yeah.
The thing where he's like watching Gary Payton say, "I could handle Michael," and then he just starts laughing, a sinister laugh. That was priceless among many moments.
That was a lot better than when Mike said the Human Centipede movie.
I was just gonna say, yeah, Mike is so into the Human Centipede movies. I mean,
He got really into them.
Yeah, Mike loves horror films, and he particularly loves the Human Centipede movies. He talks about them all the time.
Honestly, they're not bad, but yeah, they are weird. Well, thank you guys again so much, and everybody out there listening, make sure you come back again and join us next week. We're going to be back to reviewing a Simpsons episode. This time we are going to be reviewing season 11, Saddle Sore Galactica.
Let your fandom show.
Thank you.
And until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Bye, everybody.